In my paper, I chose to use source criticism to analyze the texts that are in focus. My topic for the final synthesis paper is the Synoptic Gospels, specifically Mark, and how it is similar or different to Matthew regarding the story of Jesus walking on water using source criticism. I feel that I will be able to explain this the best because I particularly enjoy this story, but also because of the amount of information I have found on the comparison of these two Gospels. We have learned about this comparison throughout this course, and I also feel that this will help me. I feel that I can explain the synoptic problem. The story of Jesus walking on water is very popular, and including my own beliefs and scholars, I will be able to explain this story. In this story, Jesus proved to his disciples that he was the Son of God, as this is one of Jesus' miracle stories. The story is known for the disciples taking the first step in worshiping Jesus as Son of God. I will explain all types of criticism, including textual criticism, form criticism, narrative criticism, redaction criticism, and source criticism. Source criticism is the analysis of the sources that were used by biblical authors. I felt that this criticism would be the best because when comparing the Gospel of Mark and Matthew with the story of Jesus walking on water, the Markan priority can be discussed. The Markan priority is the idea that the Gospel of Mark was written first and used as a source for the Gospel of Matthew and Luke. I will also explain my comparison of the story of Jesus walking on water in the Gospel of Matthew and in the Gospel of Mark. I will explain the synoptic problem throughout my paper. The synoptic problem is how do we account for the wide agreement and yet differences between the three Gospels. The three Gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and there have always been speculation if the authors of the Gospels had a common source. When comparing Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it is obvious that the three separate accounts are very similar in both content and expression. The synoptic problem is the question of how to explain the similarities and differences between the synoptic problem. There are some solutions to the synoptic problem, such as the common dependence of one gospel that was written in Hebrew or Aramaic. But if the significant text ever existed, why would there be a need to write the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke? Also, what is the likelihood that a gospel written in Hebrew or Aramaic would have exact translations in so many places? The Markan priority hypothesis is central in discussion of the synoptic problem, the question of a relationship among these three Gospels. There is some evidence that Mark was written first. 90% of Mark's verses appear in Matthew, while 50% of Mark's verses are in Luke. The Gospel of Matthew and Luke follow most of the Gospel of Mark. Both the Gospels of Matthew and Luke use the wording of Mark. The exactness shows that two of the evangelists used one or more of the other Gospels. I also will explain the Q-force, which is known as the double tradition. The Q-force consists of the Beatitudes, the Lord's Prayer, and the parable of the lost sheep. The Q-force is material shared by Matthew and Luke to distinguish it from the triple tradition, which is material common to all three synoptic Gospels. This material concludes with saying that warm here is to be vigilant in view of the coming judgment. When you reach the synoptic accounts of Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection, one no longer finds examples of the double tradition. It is important for us to have a solution of the synoptic problem. It is important because it shows that the Gospels aren't about or focused on preserving or having exact detail of the events of Jesus' life. People will be able to understand their religion more because it explains how the Gospels is written and from what. The sources I plan to use for this paper is Q or not Q, the so-called triple, double, and single tradition in the Synoptic Gospels by Adam Chesky and Bartos, which analyzes the synoptic problem and proves that they were written in the order of Mark, Luke, then Matthew. Mark's Gospel, prior or posterior, a reprisal of the phenomenon of order by David J. Neville, is another source used because it shows the similarities and differences of arrangement of the order of the episodes in the Gospels of Mark and Matthew. The source also covers the literacy relationship within the three synoptic Gospels and the competing theories of the Markan priority and the other known as the Markan posterity. The Synoptic Gospels and the Psalms as Prophecy by Samuel J. Subranian is another source I'm considering to use because it does have the subject of the Synoptic Gospels, but I'm still unsure if the source is definite. The specific order of this paper has not been decided yet, but here I have presented a rough outline of what I will be including in my final synthesis paper.